Ellie. I'm part of the team at Fuelcast. I do lots of different things, but today we're going to be talking about podcasting and how you can use that in your church, or if you've got a message or something that you're passionate about that you want to share with others. In the world that we live, where there's so many images that are in our brains, having something that's just audio and that is sort of ingrained in our life, like we're going about our day and we're listening to a podcast, it can actually really speak to us a bit more instead of bringing us into another world. So I use podcasts to record meditations and guided prayers at From Dust. 80% of film, they say, is actually audio and sound. So you really can communicate so much in a podcast, like over film. It's not like a lesser media, it's just as good. It just has like different uses. So I'd really encourage you to try podcasting if you've never tried it before. So depending on what type of podcast you're going to record, you're going to have a different research and writing process. So some people like to have podcasts that are more kind of interviews, so you'll have people talking to each other, asking questions, and some people kind of are having podcasts a bit like I write, which is more just one person talking. If you are doing a conversational one, like you're probably going to want to research your subject a bit and then start writing some questions. For me, writing the From Dust meditations, I kind of start with coming up with some ideas and themes based on where we are in the church year, sort of what I'm feeling in terms of what has God been speaking to me about recently, because we're all connected as people, so likely my experience of things is going to be a bit similar to other people's, so that's a really good place to start. Make sure that you are remembering that someone's going to be listening to it. Sometimes when we've researched something, we can make it sort of what's in our heads, but actually for someone who's never heard it before, it's really important to just remember that you kind of need to explain stuff, but in a way that's really nice to be listening to as well, and that people don't have to concentrate really, really hard to listen to. I really like to write a script before, just because I really need that to be able to sort of deliver and record well later on, but some people find it way easier just to be spontaneous and speak off the cuff, and that's totally fine. You always sound less expressive than you think you do, so if in doubt, always try to be more expressive with what you're saying, and you can do a few takes and see which one you prefer. So now you've come up with all of your ideas, it's time to start recording your podcast. And even though we've got a big setup, lots of equipment here, the important thing to note is that you actually really don't need much to get started, especially if you're just trying it out and you've never done a podcast before. In fact, you can even use the Voice Memos app on your phone, that's really good. And the inbuilt microphones in MacBooks are actually really, really good, and they get a really clear audio. So I would say if you're just starting out and you don't want to invest in all the gear, definitely go for that option. I think the thing that is most important is you do need a quiet place to record where there's not background noise. I think that's the one thing that will sort of distract people and stop them from engaging. So over time, you're going to find a method and all the equipment that suits your needs best, but I'm just going to go through some of the equipment that I've got here that I use. I've got this here, which is for absorbing some of the sound, and it just means that any echoes in the room are going to be reduced. You can just get sort of cushions, and your sofa cushions, you can just place them around the microphone, and actually that's going to absorb a lot of the sound. Any rooms with a lot of soft furnishings in, that's going to be really great for that as well. So like I said before, you can just use the mics on your phone or on your laptop, but one mic that I use that I've got here is called a condenser microphone, and that's just really good for getting sort of the close sound, all the details in the voice. And the thing I've got here, which can also really help the quality, is a pop shield, and basically what that does is it just filters out noises like p and sh, those kind of things that they can just peak in your ear a bit. And we've got a few recorders here which basically go in between you and the editing process. So this one here is Zoom, and this is also Zoom. It's a mini version, which is really handy, and you can take it around and interview people if you're having a conversation style podcast. If you're in a home setup and you want more control, adjusting levels and things like that, you can use one of these things, which is an audio interface. So with this particular microphone, there is a way to use it that's going to get, the best result that you possibly can. And I would say to put headphones on, definitely when you're testing the sound, just to check that you're really getting what you want and that there's not too much background noise. You want to sort of be really close to the microphone. It's going to pick up everything that you say, and it's just going to remove any of that background noise. The other thing to say is that just try not to blow too much air through it, otherwise you're going to get sort of a muffled sound and it's going to just make the audio not clear. Do a few takes if you need to, and then you can pick between them. Just speak a bit slower than you think is necessary, because we actually normally speak really fast in conversation, but when someone's trying to listen to you, especially if you're trying to convey information, you need to speak a bit slower just so that people can take in everything you're saying. And especially if you're doing something like I tend to do, which is a meditation, you definitely don't want to speak too fast because you're going to hurry people. So the last tip that may seem a little strange is to smile, which is odd because we're only recording audio. The expression that you bring to your voice is going to change how people hear it, but just try and be present to the emotions of what you're saying and get that expression in your voice, because it just makes it more engaging, especially if it's informal. People want to feel conversational and informal. They don't want to feel sort of like they're listening to just information. So try and anchor people with the expression that's in your voice. So when you've done recording, you're going to move on to editing, and this process is really going to vary depending on what kind of podcast you've made and what software you have. The software I'm using is called Logic Pro X, but there's lots of different options for you to use. If you already have video editing software, often a lot of them have ability to just edit the audio. Other software that's really good is GarageBand if you've got a Mac. If you've got a PC, you can use Audacity. So let's take a look at a basic edit. This is one I've already started, so you can just see some of the things I've been doing in here. So regardless of what software you're going to use, there's going to be some basic tools that are just really good to know for all podcast making. So we've just got this is the normal selector tool, and you can just use that to drag things around, obviously really useful. And then the other main tool that you want to use is the cut tool, which just allows you to obviously cut and separate, make clips, and move them around. Make sure you change it back before you start cutting everywhere accidentally. I actually tend to end up using a lot of shortcuts, and they can actually really speed up your workflow. So if you can figure out some good shortcuts just to help you cut quicker. So we're just going to listen to this clip and see which bits of it we want to keep.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Take a moment to picture that nothing.
So I'm just going to put a cut here just because these are two different bits that we've got going on. So we don't need as much space in between those.
Take a moment to picture that nothingness. In your imagination, place yourself in that formless and empty space. The darkness is so dark you cannot know if there is anything there.
So the first two bits of these clips are actually the same, but then I've added in something on the second time of doing it. So I'm just thinking that I prefer the second one. So I'm going to drag that up there into the first bit. And then I'm going to mute this because that's the draft, and unmute this because this is what I'm using. I'm just going to check all of it sort of flows well together. And when you're doing this, you really want to think about, at least for doing a meditation podcast, someone actually listening to it. You might think, oh, there's too much space between what I'm saying, but actually in this sort of podcast, the type that I'm writing, you do actually want a lot of space for the person to take it in. You can do a few extra things just to get that higher quality if that's something that you feel able to and want to explore. So one of the things we can do is some EQ, and in Logic it's here like in the plugins, which are basically tools that you can add to the audio to like put effects on it, make different things. So in the EQ for a podcast, we're kind of hoping to emphasize the lower frequencies just because that's what the podcast sound is. So we're sort of looking to increase around like 200 to 300. So like right now it has some EQ on it, but if I was to take that away, the sound will be different.
In this month's episode, we're going to be engaging our senses in imaginative contemplation on the creation story.
But if you increase the EQ here, it will sound a little bit different.
Imaginative and immersive prayer is a form of prayer that has been practiced by many Christians in history.
So it might sound like a really subtle difference, and like some people might not even notice it, but actually when you're listening to it overall, I think it does make a difference. We talked earlier about those sounds that the pop shield is supposed to get rid of, the sort of sh and the p sounds. Sometimes they still make it into your mix. So you see this here, this is where I've taken out a really specific frequency that's making that sound. So
Ignatius of Loyola specifically thought that using our bodily senses in an
So you can hear the S's are really pronounced in that, and that can be a little bit distracting if you've got a lot of it in your podcast and you really don't want that to get in the way of the message you're trying to share. So what you can do is you can just make this like really thin, so it's really hitting that specific amount, and then just drag it down, and that hits that frequency.
Imaginative way can allow God to speak to us in new ways.
Another good thing to add is something that is called a denoiser or a noise gate, and it basically just takes out any background noise in between when you're speaking, and it's really clever. It can sort of hear when you're talking and when it's just sort of you're breathing or something, and it just helps to make your voice sound clearer basically. So the last thing that you can do is just to add something called compression, which basically just makes all the volumes that you're speaking at kind of sound even, so it's just less distracting, and it means that everything you say is going to be heard. And it just means that if there's moments where you're sort of giving certain expressions, so you're speaking softer or louder, they're actually heard at the same volume, but the expression's still there, and it just helps everything to be heard really clearly so that your message is going to get across. So the next thing we can do just to finish off the podcast is add some music, and depending on what kind of podcast you've recorded, you might need like a really short bit of music just for the intro, or you might need music for the whole thing. And there's lots of different types of music. You're going to want to find something royalty free or that you can license, unless you've made it yourself, which would be great if you have. Music is so great because it can really add to what you've been saying, really emphasize your points, especially if you're trying to bring something that's quite emotional. It can really add that sort of extra thing that really sends home the message. But equally, if you pick the wrong music that just isn't appropriate, it can really distract from what you're trying to say, and people might not take what you want them to take from the podcast. So it can take a while to find music, unless you're really lucky first time, but don't be disheartened if at first you don't think you can find the right thing. So when you're all done editing and you're pretty much happy with what you've got, just give it one last listen through and put yourself in the shoes of the listener, trying to just see how it's coming across, make sure that it's doing what you want it to. And then when you're done, you're ready to export. You want to be exporting probably as an MP3, but there's other formats as well that you can find out more about if you Google them. There's lots of places now that you can put podcasts if you want everyone to be able to access it. So Spotify is really good, Apple Podcasts. There are some services that allow you to put it on multiple platforms at the same time. Podcasting is such a good creative outlet, and it's really accessible. We've explored loads of tools today, but as I want to emphasize, you can start with it being basic. As long as your message is clear, then it's going to work really well. And it's such a great outlet for your message, what God's put on your heart. And it really is worth doing, even if you're not sure about it. So really give it a try and just explore all the things you can do with that.